Hello, everyone, and welcome to Coast Salish Salmon and Orca Cultures. This will be a quick overview of the orca culture part of that picture. So I will move right along to the presentation. This is where we're talking about. This is the Salish Sea as seen from the space station. And this, of course, is coastal Salish orca and salmon cultures. So it does apply up and down the coast, wherever there are salmon and native cultures out, also looking for those salmon and sharing these waters. So this is called Coast Salish, salmon and orca culture. So just to give a little historical perspective, thousands of years ago, as ice melted, rivers began to pour, and the trees grew along the rivers, the salmon streamed up the rivers, sensing the fresh water and finding places to spawn and replenish and propagate their populations. And about the same time, the first peoples, the first humans, began to settle in all along the coast. And of course, they found these salmon as a beautiful and very abundant. And they were water people. They went everywhere by canoe. We do know that these were canoe cultures. They went to visit relatives, to forage, to hunt, to move to seasonal settlements by canoe. Hop in the canoe and take off. It was all connected by waterways, and that was how they traveled. So they were in the realm of the orcas and had no doubt many face-to-face encounters with the orcas, which were here too as cultures, as families, as extended kinship associations and populations that the native cultures would have interfaced with and met with and gotten to know. And I'm sure there was mutual curiosity, and they would, I can only speculate because I assume that the orcas were curious about the humans and vice versa. And so they got very friendly. They began to know individuals and families and would see them grow over the years and over the generations, and it was a very intimate relationship. And so it's really no surprise that the Lummi word for orca is Queltolmichin, which means the people who live under the sea. And they were what we now know as the Southern residents. They've been here for 10,000 years as well, probably more. And they are different. They are a completely intact, genetically cohesive community, a very large extended family. They used to be much larger, probably over 200, 200 to 300 is the normal size for an orchid population around the world. And that is probably about the population that they sustained for thousands of years. And they are different. And this is not really a scientific determination. It's what I understand from having observed other people's work around the world, that the southern resident orcas are different in several ways. They're more active. They tend to be more surface active, more splashing, more all kinds of acrobatics, from breaching to tail lobbing to cartwheeling in every direction to belly flopping, everything that is possible. They have been known to do, and then some. And they're more social. They tend to congregate and they tend to want to apparently be together a lot in the largest groupings with the most kin, often in what is called a super pod, where the different pods from within the community of Southern residents come together. And when they do that, they're often just socializing. They're not there to forage, they're there to be together. And you can see, you can feel the enjoyment, the enthusiasm that they show when they're together. and they're more playful. In those times, and really almost any time, they tend to just break out into these frolicsome, playful activities, kind of rolling around on each other, a lot of tactile, kinetic, action going on. And it's fascinating to watch, especially the kids, the young ones, the juveniles. They'll often play together or with their moms or relatives, and just they just seem to want to play. They kind of jump on each other, and they're more curious. They seem to want to look around. They seem to want to get to know who's looking at them and what's around. It's hard to tell what exactly they're looking around for, but often when people are in the neighborhood in boats or on shore, they'll take a look at them. I mean, just passing by. They don't necessarily stop and want to have a party with them, but they'll take a look. They're curious. And of course, southern residents have more open saddle patches. That's a genetic thing, but it shows up more often in the resident fish-eating types all along the Pacific Rim, from here to Alaska to Kamchatka, more than in the other type, the transients or big killer whales that are found around here also, which is where we get into the cultures coming right up. And the southern residents are almost always, when they're not intensely socializing, they're hunting, they're looking for salmon, they're trying to find those fish that are more and more elusive, more and more scattered, more and more in decline and hard to find, and so scarce in these waters. So they're often spread out over, it can be miles. This photo gives a sense of how they look when they're foraging over a wide area, but it can be 5 or more miles of orcas that, of course, are in touch with each other. They're able to echolocate, they're able to communicate over those distances, but they're looking in every nook and cranny. They're desperately searching for salmon. And when they don't find enough, they suffer reproductive failure, is one of the main indications that they're just not getting enough nutrition, enough calories, which means enough salmon, especially the Chinook salmon, which have been found to be about 80% of their diet. So they're searching always for those Chinook salmon or a few other species, not all. They are fairly picky eaters. Coho and chum salmon is just about it, and some other assorted fishes every now and then, but basically they're looking for Chinook salmon. And when they don't find them, when they don't get those calories, the pregnant females are not able to provide for their developing young. And if the young are even born, they are often not going to last very long, especially this one, Tahlequah's baby, who is named T. Tahlequah by our Samish friends. Died at birth, basically, and was carried by her mom, J35 Tahlequah, for 17 or more, maybe up to 19 days in July and August of 2018, which was concurrent with the governor's task force on restoring southern residents. So it was very timely, and it was broadcast around the world. As many have noted, it was the grief felt around the world. So looking back at the field studies, they really began in the early 1970s in Canada by Dr. Mike Bigg, who was tasked by the Canadian government to conduct a survey to find out how many orcas there were. There was really nothing else known about them than they lived out there, and the prevailing beliefs were that they were dangerous. And that they were fierce, not only predators, but competitors for the salmon. So the government wanted to know how many there were, was that population being depleted? And that began the studies. And it wasn't until about 10 years later, in 1980, in the very early 80s, that John Ford uh, did some acoustic recordings and discovered that the different pods made different sounds, and that the different communities, more startling even, made completely different sounds, completely different vocabularies of calls, of communication signals that they made to each other. So that was, very shocking, really, to the scientific community. Um, and then, about 10 years later, he and many others that studied the diets of the different populations made it official in a paper about two sympatric populations of killer whales, meaning the transients and the residents, that had completely different diets, mutually exclusive. The residents eat fish, the transients eat mammals, and that really is uh, earth-shattering in the scientific community because they are sympatric. They are in the same habitat. They cross paths, fully aware of each other, and yet they have completely different diets, and that is only an indication. That's one of the starkest, but is only an indication of the completely different cultural repertoires and behaviors that each demonstrate. And as John, again, he was always in the right place at the right time and did the right studies. And as he said, these animals are creatures of tradition. They learn as a calf what constitutes food and how to catch it. And that is the very definition of culture, is learning behaviors. And that also applies, of course, then to the mating practices. So the mating and the diets and the communications are all determined by culture, by what is learned, not instinct. And one of the things that is in their cultures is to share their prey. They very often share prey, especially moms with her offspring. But it is a widespread practice to share the fish that they find. And that helps explain why during the decline, the 20% drop in population between 1995 and 2001, that it wasn't the old and the young that died so much. They were provided for. It was across the board. It was sort of evenly in the population, which indicates that the healthy ones able to catch more fish shared those fish. Also, part of culture in the southern residents is apparently to wear a fish. Occasionally, just for a while. It's like a fad that wears out after a short while, and it seems to be mainly the juveniles, and the game seems to be, how long can I keep this fish on my head? So there's no good biological explanation for that, but it seems to be a cultural, peer group bonding experience that they share. So this is what announced for the world, basically, that these orcas live in cultures. Culture in whales and dolphins in 2001 summed it all up, studied every known documented population of whales around the world, humpbacks, pilot whales, sperm whales, and orcas. And what they wrote in their abstract really did the world, which was the complex and stable vocal and behavioral cultures of sympatric groups of killer whales appear to have no parallel outside humans and represent an independent evolution of cultural faculties. That is really earth shattering, and that has sort of set the stage for the field studies that have gone on around the world to document and describe all these cultures in the Antarctic, the North Atlantic, the South Pacific, everywhere that you find orcas, and they are everywhere. around the world. They are looked at now as cultures, each one intact. Each individual is a member of a culture. And that is really a resounding new paradigm. And around here, of course, we have the northern residents on the north end of Vancouver Island and up around Haida Gwaii in southeast Alaska. And the transients, the bigs, killer whales, named in honor of Mike Big. And the transients and residents, as I mentioned, are so distinct in their diets, in their group size, in their vocalizations, slightly different morphology, a little different sizes, fin shapes. And of course, transients have no open saddles. That's one way. And genetic studies show they've been distinct for at least 700,000 years while crossing paths and able to interbreed, but not interbreeding. There's really no interaction between them at all. And of course, they don't compete for food because they have distinct and separate diets. So that is sympatric speciation. They are each becoming their own separate species over the generations. And then we also have the offshores, which are most related to the residents, but have been distinct again for hundreds of thousands of years. And they're found out along the shelf, 25 or 30 miles out. Very difficult to study out in that open ocean, but their diet has been determined to be mainly sleeper sharks. And they have come in, but it's been really a couple of decades since they've come into the Salish Sea. They stay out well beyond the coast. And this is the classic illustration poster by Uko Gorter of the different types around the world. The northern hemisphere, the southern hemisphere, so the fish eaters, the mammal eaters, the penguin eaters, the toothfish eaters, minke whales are prey for some, herring, everywhere that you look, there are different diets, and each community has a very specific diet. Certain animals that they will eat and without overlap. They don't eat each other's food. Now around here, of course, we're back to the Chinook, and sad story there is that they are in crisis. Snake River Chinook have declined to near zero. They're winking out right now. They're about to disappear if something isn't done very, very soon to restore the Snake River and allow for those Chinook populations in the Snake River watershed. And that's not just another run of salmon. The Snake River amounted to about half of the production of Chinook salmon of the entire Columbia Basin. And the Columbia Basin was the largest salmon producing watershed in certainly this coast and probably the world, and was the mainstay, the primary source of salmon for southern residents for those 10,000 or more years. Now they're almost gone. So the wild salmon need to be brought back. And of course, that's true of Puget Sound Chinook too, also in crisis, according to the Washington DFW. There are many rivers that produced a lot of Chinook cumulatively, but they are all pretty much disappeared. Salmon are already extinct in 40% of their historical range. And now, of course, the Fraser River salmon have also crashed. So the orcas are not coming in the usual spring and summer when the Fraser River salmon are running, because they're not. They're not here for them. They're somewhere out on the coast, and we can only hope and pray that they are finding salmon. But those salmon themselves have declined in size. Used to be sometimes up to 80 pounds or more, but averaging probably around 20 pounds 50 years ago, and now averaging more like 10 pounds. So that is a very sad statement on what their diminished habitat has done to the salmon. But I don't want to just leave you on that note, because we do have some new babies, some new calves that have been born in the last couple of years. February 2021, this year, new calf, L125, born to L86. And in September last year, less than a year ago, two babies were born. J57 and J58 were both born. And in May of 2019, just 2 years ago, baby J56 was born. And others were born in January of that year, two others. So we have a lot of new babies, and by all reports, which are not that many reports in recent months because they've been out along the coast, so we don't really have a lot of continual updates on the population, but they do seem to be doing well. All the calves are so far surviving, and that is very, very good news. And in February of this year, J37 Heiska, which means thank you, had J59, her second calf. J59 is a female. Thank you, and enjoy Orca month.